I think there's always going to be like struggle, and there's always meant to be struggle. You're supposed to do hard things as much as you can tolerate. The thing that has always terrified me about that is liquidation risk. I still think that another March 2020 crash could very easily happen. I have an maybe unpopular opinion, but I think it's unnecessary to be all in on Bitcoin from like a personal perspective.
Joe Burnett, my man. Good to see you.
Hey, Trey. Thanks for having me on your show.
Yeah, this is the first ever episode of the FIRE BTC Podcast. And I really debated quite a bit about doing this or not doing this. And it's just going to be a lackadaisical effort here. We're going to have some good conversations just about personal finance. I feel like there's plenty of Bitcoin podcasts out there, and you have amazing content that you're posting on almost a daily basis to X and to your YouTube channel and all of that. If anybody's listening and haven't checked out Joe's YouTube channel, go check it out. But I thought I'd take a different approach, which is that I think a lot of people, especially who read my newsletter, are really looking for like real world use cases and different applications because everybody's situation is different. You know, I write about financial independence and Bitcoin and how the two intersect and random events that are happening throughout the world. And I try to get practical, like from my perspective. But I think that having other Bitcoiners on who are at various stages in their careers and their Bitcoin journey and their financial journey and their personal finance perspectives will actually provide a little bit of a unique take on all this stuff. So that's why we're here. And I wanted to have you on as the first guest because one, you're a good friend of mine. And two, because I think you sit at a very unique nexus in all of this because you're young, you're about to get married, you've been a Bitcoiner for quite a while. And you have been working in the Bitcoin world now for what's it been, 4 or 5 years?
2021. So yeah, 5 years.
Yeah. So why don't we start, for anybody who doesn't know your background, maybe just a little bit of your background, how you came to Bitcoin, what clicked for you with all of that, and then how did you find your way into working at Unchained and now at Strive through this acquisition with Similar Scientific?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to get into my background and been a long-time reader of FireBTC on Substack. So
Appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Excited to be on this show. Yeah, I mean, my background, I first remember not really learning about Bitcoin until 2017. So that cycle where Bitcoin may have started the year around $1,000, went up to around $20,000 at the peak. That was the first time I can ever really remember hearing about it. And I've told this one story a couple times, but I'll say it this time. And when I was in middle school, actually, so this was probably like 2011, 2012, I built an Android app called Commodity Prices that tracked the price of gold, silver, wheat, cattle, whatever else. And I think like by miracle, I somehow did not discover Bitcoin at that point. I feel like I was primed, being interested in technology, being interested in finance and money, being kind of like libertarian or freedom minded. And somehow, for whatever reason, I guess at the time, the Yahoo Finance API, didn't have the Bitcoin price in 2012 or 2011. That if it did, I feel like I probably would have been pretty interested in it at that point. But unfortunately, that did not happen. So 2017 happened. The price of Bitcoin kept going up. I was always like raised and taught to be more of like a value investor, like buy Coke, IBM, Southern Company, blue chip stocks that have been around forever. They pay you like a 3% dividend and they, go up 2% per year for forever, basically. And I thought that was how you kind of save for the future. And then I saw Bitcoin. I was like, what the heck is this thing? It goes from 1,000 to 2,000 to 3,000 to 6,000, and then almost to 20,000 by the end of the year. And so I just decided to buy like a little bit when I was in college.
Yeah, you were in college when all of this was happening, right? Like
Yes.
you hadn't graduated yet, hadn't started working. So
No.
which is a very interesting time period for your life, but also in where Bitcoin was at the time, because it's still nascent. People don't know about it. I highly doubt that the people around you in college knew anything about Bitcoin, right? Like,
Yeah,
um, I hadn't heard about it until I was out of college. It was, I'm a little bit older than you are, but just kind of an interesting time frame there.
totally. Yeah, and it was definitely interesting. Like I remember being in like various like finance clubs and investing clubs and or like one or two, and Bitcoin and even Nvidia. Like Nvidia was actually ironically having a really good year in 2017, and so those were like two of the hot topics that honestly every single person hated because they were like, "What is Bitcoin?" We're if you take a couple finance classes, you know that you value things off the cash flow that it could potentially bring you in the future, and this digital object had obviously no cash flows as a digital rock. And so, a lot of people, I honestly didn't bring it up too much because it didn't want to sound unintelligent. I would bring it up with like my closer friends and you're like, probably thought I was crazy, but, uh, kept thinking about it. So price ripped up, almost to 20,000. And I was just fascinated at that point because I was like, how is this thing performing like this? What is happening here? And then the 2018 bear market, I just really dove as deep as I possibly could into Bitcoin. I was DMing people like Pierre Richard, reading everything about, on the Nakamoto Institute, and, looking back through that website, I was like, this is like a weird, unique internet blog, but it was very logical. It just made a lot of sense to me. And I would go see the counter arguments of, people that didn't like Bitcoin. And I'll be like, I mean, I see like your perspective, but I think you just haven't like looked into it and you haven't really necessarily questioned what money is. And, the market is kind of saying like, hey, something is here, other like the price has been moving higher for, I guess at that point, over a decade,
It's so funny
or
because
almost a decade.
all of the same like objections or, questions that people have today are
Yeah,
exactly the same as what you were hearing back then and what you were reading about back then. They're all the same. There's nothing new under the sun.
exactly. And to me, like I feel like in investing in general, that's how you like actually can identify unique opportunities. You find something that's incredibly controversial, and you see why people are putting up their objections to it, and then you just look into their objections. Like, are their objections right, or are they like, do they have like a weird bias that they don't necessarily know? And I think a lot of people, when it comes to Bitcoin, almost everybody, when it comes to Bitcoin, when you first hear about it, you're like, this. What is this? This doesn't make any sense. This is a scam. This is a bubble. It's a Ponzi scheme. I mean, that's how I had initially thought until I just actually started looking into it. Um,
Well, Joe, you were buying it in college though, right?
yeah.
So you're buying it in college. How are you buying it? Like, did you have a job while you were in college? Where was the
Uh,
money coming from? Feel free to share whatever, whatever you're comfortable with, but
no, like, so I actually had this conversation with someone the other day. It's like people are like, wow, you were like really early to Bitcoin, but then, it's like I didn't really have much money back then.
yeah.
Like, I did not have a job. I worked like later in college. I worked for like a couple Bitcoin companies part time. Uh, but I didn't, 2017, I did not have a job. Summers like for in high school, I guess in college, I had summer internships, but I probably did plow like as much as possible, as much as I could from the summer internships. And then, like in high school, I had a job working at my local golf course. So I'd like saved up some money and, I was that was prior to Bitcoin. So investing in, stocks and S&P 500 and things like that.
Were
Uh,
you thinking about this as like saving? I know you mentioned, okay, the way I grew up was buying Coca-Cola and Southern Company and getting dividends and whatever these like, slow motion uh, consumer style stocks
yeah.
or whatever. But were you thinking about Bitcoin in the same way, or was this kind of just more like hey, let's just throw a flyer out there and see what happens? So I'm starting to understand it, so might as well throw some money at it.
Yeah, I mean, initially, I would say it was just like a flyer. Like I said, I was interested in finance. I was interested in money itself, I was interested in, and the price was captivating. Like the short term dopamine addict in me was interested in learning about Bitcoin. So in the very first stages, it was just like I'm curious. I want to learn more about what this is, and putting a little bit of money into it is going to like encourage me to take some time to really think about it.
Yeah, and you didn't have much money to put into it at the
Yeah,
time anyway, so
yeah.
you
It was a
kind of had
lot
no
to me. It was a
choice.
lot to me, but yeah, it wasn't much
Yeah,
money.
right, exactly. Yeah. So then you graduated, you started working. What were you doing after you graduated?
Yeah. So I graduated. My first job was technology consulting at EY. And at the peak of the 2021 bull market, I had an opportunity to join a Bitcoin company full time. And I was like, well, this is a no brainer. Of course, I definitely should do this. It's a company called Blockware Solutions, great company, still around today, obviously. But of course, I joined at the peak. So I rode out the 2022 bear market, which was, pretty fun because, or not, or it was fun, but it was intense because, you have a lot of your wealth in an asset that is incredibly volatile. And then also your job is tied to the success of this asset, which makes it even more intense. So that was an
Yeah, I have
interesting
a lot of personal experience in
yeah,
exactly the same situation.
yeah. So that was an interesting experience for me. And I think like it's funny because looking back, I've thought, if you told me in November of 2021 that, Joe, if you quit your job, Bitcoin at 60 something thousand dollars right now is going to go down to $16,000 next year, there's no chance I would have quit my job and, gone to work for a Bitcoin company. But I'm glad I did, even though I'd timed it terribly. But it's also funny because like,
Well,
if
can you really time it
yeah,
in a good way? I mean, in a bull market, the opportunities are available, and in a bear market, nobody's hiring, right? So
exactly.
it's much more difficult to find something there unless you just start whatever you're going to do.
Yep.
I'm guessing this was like, what was your mindset there when you were taking that job? It sounds like by the time that you graduated, by the time that you started working, Bitcoin was like the thing for you in terms of your primary savings vehicle. Were you buying stocks also? Were you thinking about like other assets, or was it all Bitcoin?
Any like incremental dollars that I had were pretty much getting plowed directly into Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
yeah, it was,
So it
and
was your primary savings vehicle, and then you were just thinking about like, oh, how many sats can I stack as quickly as possible?
yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Was
And
there
I,
any kind of longer term thought process about what that would look like, going forward, or you're just a 22-year-old, young man just trying to find your way in the world?
yeah, I guess like longer term process as far as accumulating Bitcoin, like did I have a plan for that, or what do you mean?
Well, you know, when we think about personal finance, there's more than just accumulating the assets, right?
Yeah,
It's like, how do you think about the spending that you're doing,
yeah,
right? Did you have any kind of mindset around, okay, this is what my expenses are. I'm going to make sure
yeah.
that I'm trying to minimize that so I can stack more Bitcoin. Like, did you have any framework there at all? Or were you just kind of going forward like I was back in the day, which is just kind of riding through without much thought process?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think like looking back over just as I grew up, I've always been like a fairly inexpensive person because I intuitively like whether it was Bitcoin or stocks, like I wanted to save for the future. It was kind of in a way I've always kind of looked at it as like, sports betting is fun, but it's like it's negative, it's a negative sum game, like you're going to lose over the long run. Stocks and Bitcoin, I would say are positive sum and they're fun and in a way they're kind of gambling too. So you kind of get the same rush, but like the longer you played, the more money you make if you make decent decisions. And so it was kind of just like I would rather invest or save something than maybe consume a vacation or something. Maybe weird, but that's kind of just kind of more fun to me for whatever reason. So I didn't think too much about my spending because my spending was pretty minimal, and I honestly still don't think too much about my spending because I just I don't spend that much. I spend like
It's something that just comes naturally to you. You don't have to like pull back.
yeah, not really. I mean, and I don't even necessarily. I wouldn't even say I try to be cheap or be inexpensive. It's more like I live like how I really would want to live without like too much excess, and whatever else is left over, I just keep piling into Bitcoin mostly.
Do you think that came just from the example that your parents set, or like was that just kind of how you grew up? It's like, okay, yeah, we're not going to be extravagant. We're just going to spend within our means, but that's pretty easy to do. I think a lot of people have like very different influences as they're
Yeah,
growing up, you know?
I would definitely say it's probably my family. It's kind of setting that example, like living mostly modestly throughout you know, ever since I grew up. But then also, like I said, like I in a way, investing and saving in Bitcoin like was my form of consumption. Like I got excited about doing that, and so that was just like what excited me, and still excites me to this day.
Yeah. Okay, so fast forward, you worked at Unchained for a few years. I don't see you quite as much as I used to, unfortunately, but we got to make a change there. But now you're in a Bitcoin treasury company. You started at Similar, and then Similar, that acquisition with Strive just happened. Has the way that you approach all of this stuff changed over the years as you kind of went through that bear market? Now we've kind of had what some people would call a bull market. Doesn't really feel like it.
Yeah.
And we're in this kind of new paradigm of Bitcoin just kind of languishing over the past year or so, giving people an opportunity to stack more. And I imagine that, over the course of your career, like everybody, you tend to make more money, right? If you're doing things even remotely correctly, you should be making a little bit more money, and being able to stack a little bit more and that kind of thing. Has your perspective changed? It sounds like your spending habits really haven't.
Yeah, my spending habits haven't really changed. Uh, my perspective probably hasn't changed too much. I mean, I think like in 2022 when I was working full time in Bitcoin, I looking back, I was stacking Bitcoin, of course, but I could have probably stacked a lot more if I like was really confident that the bottom was close, and then I wouldn't would keep my job and everything because I have rent to pay and other expenses, obviously. So like, um, I think that taught me to maybe be a little bit more conservative. Like I've mentioned this multiple times before, but I have an maybe unpopular opinion, but like I think it's unnecessary to be all in on Bitcoin from like a personal perspective. I think like if generally like we're right about Bitcoin and the Bitcoin thesis comes to fruition and Bitcoin, reaches gold parity or goes significantly higher, like it's millions of dollars per Bitcoin. And, at a certain point, it's like you're just kind of getting greedy. You don't necessarily need too much Bitcoin to live a perfectly free, happy life. I would argue, but so like yes, I stack Bitcoin. Yes, it's like my primary long term savings tool, of course. But I think as I've gotten older, I've gotten maybe a little bit more conservative. Like you mentioned earlier, like getting married at some point, and we'll buy a house at some point. So like those expenses coming down the line, and then having like more responsibility. It's like if I live by myself in an apartment and I have no people to care for other than myself, I'm very comfortable watching my portfolio fall 80%. Like that doesn't, it's not fun, but it doesn't bother me. The moment I bring in other people into that, whether it's a spouse or I feel like, or kids down the line, it's going to be a different animal where I'm like, okay, can't, can't have this fall 80. You can't have everything fall 80% when, especially if my job is tied to it as well. So, I think as I've gotten older, I've gotten a little bit more conservative, uh, but still, Bitcoin.
Conservative in what way, though? Meaning you're like buying other assets, in addition to Bitcoin? Conservative in what way?
I would say, yeah. Well, I would say like like again, I'm getting married and eventually want to buy a house. So like, somewhat recently, I've been accumulating more cash than I otherwise normally
Hmm.
would, uh, just because I'm gonna have a big expense coming up. Also had a honeymoon that's coming up, so I had to pay that
Yeah.
expense.
Yeah.
So things like that, like I've been stacking maybe less than normal, and also like I mean, at a certain point, like your Bitcoin holdings like becomes pretty significant, and you know, if I plowed a lot into it, or Bitcoin treasury companies or whatever else, it's like, you know, it makes it will help, you know, long term, but it's pretty sizable. So at a
Yeah,
certain
it's
point,
harder. This goes back to like this concept of BTC yield, and I've talked about this in the past, and I've written about this. Is like at a certain point, like the natural function of accumulating any asset, but especially Bitcoin because it's fixed in supply, is a declining BTC yield, meaning like the incremental stacking that you're able to do is always going to have a lower impact relative to the stacking that you've done in the past, because those first early years of you stacking so hard, you accumulate a lot, especially relative to what you started from, right? It's like if you're acquiring your first 10 million sats, well, to add another 10 million sats doesn't take a whole lot of money, right? Like 10 million sats right now is like $9,000. Okay, you accumulated $9,000 worth of Bitcoin. Uh, Assuming the price does what it did in 2025, it's basically flat. To accumulate another 10 million sats, $9,000 doesn't take all that much. You go from 1 Bitcoin to 2 Bitcoin, though. Now all of a sudden you've got to stack an extra $100,000 or $90,000 worth.
yeah.
Like that's a much bigger thing, and so that's harder to do, and uh, it creates this like naturally declining rate at which you can stack, and it also like the yield that you're getting on that extra stacking is so much smaller relative to the nest egg that you've already built, because the compounding nature of the way that Bitcoin grows, it just starts doing all the heavy lifting.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. And that's why I think like if you look at probably like almost any early Bitcoin adopters Bitcoin stack, you know, it probably like is an asymptote, and then at some point it may even start dropping if you start spending out of your stack. Like, and yeah, I think that that's probably just like the natural evolution of Bitcoin. Like that's, you know, people say like what happened in 2025. You know, one of the arguments is OGs selling people much earlier to Bitcoin than I was, obviously. Uh, I think that that's kind of exactly what's happened. Like that, you know, if you're sitting on like $100 million worth of Bitcoin, you know, I'd probably buy a couple of houses and other things as well, and make sure that I'm set for forever. Like, there's no need to, you know, being a billionaire would be pretty cool, but you know, it's not required for you to have a great life. And if you sell, you know, 10% of your 100 million stack and buy other assets or a house or whatnot, I mean, you could still probably become a billionaire just waiting it out for another couple decades.
Yeah, it's like at a certain point you've got way more than enough, right? Like you've overstacked in a certain perspective. I think a lot of us Bitcoiners would say, "Oh, you can never have too much Bitcoin." And that's true in some sense, but from just like a practical standpoint, it's like at a certain point you can buy anything that you want reasonably, and there's no real reason to continue to save. And you know, so you start making different decisions, or you start making different, like you start weighing things a little bit differently,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah. Like another way to think, like sometimes I like to exaggerate examples to make it like super obvious. It's like if Bitcoin was $1 billion today, like why would I spend like, you know, 9 to 5 every week working a job to make like a couple sats?
Right.
It just wouldn't make
Yeah.
any sense.
Peel off, you know, a million sats and live like a king for the next like 200 years,
Yeah,
right? It's like,
exactly.
yeah. So, it sounds like then that your conception of selling Bitcoin, at least at some point in the future, like that's perfectly fine in your mindset. Or like, how do you think about selling Bitcoin versus borrowing against it versus some of the other methods that you could use this Bitcoin that you've stacked to actually fund your lifestyle?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Um, like I don't really have any intention to sell Bitcoin at any point in the near future, for sure. You know, I think like so. This is kind of the only Bitcoin that this is a confession I'll have to make, but I bought one of the things that I bought like a long time ago was GBTC, which I should have bought real Bitcoin. I hated that I bought that. But I have some, obviously some of that, and if I ever sell Bitcoin, that will be some of the first Bitcoin that I sell because it's a terrible product. So that would be something that I would sell. But other than that, like I
But
plan.
at least you held that back to the NAV collapsing to par
Yeah, yeah,
instead
still
of
did
being at a
well.
40% discount. Like I sold GBTC that I had in a 401k, you know, because I was like, I wouldn't buy it in a taxable account. I would just buy real Bitcoin. But I was like, oh, well, this is the only vehicle out there for my 401k that I could buy in like a brokerage link account.
Yeah,
And so I did. And then as soon as I was able to roll that into an IRA at Unchained, I did that, but unfortunately that was at like a 30% discount. So that was not a great trade there for me.
yeah, yeah. Mine could have been a lot better too. Well, I actually bought GBTC in a brokerage account, and I did it like a while back. Like the reason why I did it was because when I was learning about Bitcoin in 2018, you get down like the self custody rabbit hole, which obviously I'm a firm believer in the importance of self custody. But then it got to the point where this was like, I don't even know if Unchained had launched the vault product at this point. And, I'd been stacking Bitcoin, putting it on, like a hardware wallet or whatnot. And I was like, this is like getting to like a significant, like a serious amount of money that like I just don't feel comfortable like holding this in my house, like all in one thing. Whether my house burned down, whether someone broke into my house while I wasn't there, whether someone just broke into my house in period, like it started to feel really weird. And I was like, and buying the hardware wallets, from a Cold Card or Trezor or whatnot, I was like, I don't even really know who these companies are. Like obviously you can, the firmware for these hardware wallets is open source, but like I'm not reading the code. Like I don't know if this is actually legit. And like these are pretty small companies, so I didn't know if they were 100% trustworthy. And so the custody kind of freaked me out. And I think and that's why I loved working on Chain, because I like fully believed in the product. It solved so many problems that I saw, because I think like, I mean, it's still very early, and I just don't trust any if you don't have to trust people, like I'd rather not trust people. And I think like the security of private keys and the way, your hardware wallet secures them, the way it interacts with the computer, I feel like there's just so many like unknowns that uh I wasn't fully able to comprehend, and still I think a lot of people probably aren't fully able to comprehend like the various risks that could be involved. But that
There
that
is somewhat of a leap of faith. I mean, you can understand it to a deep enough level where you can get comfortable with it. Like I feel like I've done that, you've done that. It takes a little while, and it takes some actual tangible working with the private keys and sending and receiving and all that before you start feeling like really comfortable. After a while, I mean, I've been at Unchained over 4 years. It's like I've sent and received so much Bitcoin over time, and I've used Lightning wallets and all this stuff. You come to just understand that, hey, it's just going to work,
yeah.
the same way that like normal people, quote unquote, they fire up their Venmo app and they just kind of expect that it's going to work and it's going to be fairly easy and they don't have to worry about it, right?
Yeah.
Whereas like some people are sending, PayPal, Venmo, Cash App, whatever, for like thousands of dollars, and they just
Yeah.
assume that it's going to work because that's been their experience, and it piles up over time. It gets into the back of your brain like, oh yeah, this is safe. I've done this a million times. No problem. I'll send, $10,000 over Venmo or whatever you're able to do, right? So
Yep. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. I totally agree. It's like it's a foreign concept, and you get more comfortable with it over time. But yeah, that was my train of thought for that.
When you've been buying Bitcoin or when you're buying Bitcoin now, do you do that normally in like lump sums whenever you get the cash? Do you have like an automatic DCA that's set up anywhere? Like how do you think about buying Bitcoin? How did you and how do you now?
Yeah, this is a great question. Like I've done I've done it so many different ways. I've tried to keep track of my cost basis and everything, but I know if I ever start, that's another reason I don't want to sell Bitcoin, because
It's just
it's
a big to do.
I
I
bought
gotta
from
figure out how to pay taxes on this. I don't want to do
yeah,
that.
I bought from so many different places and so many different amounts with DCAs, with lump sums, with like it would be an absolute nightmare to try to figure that out. So I've tried, I've done most of it, but not all of it, I guess. So I've done all of the above. And
There's some portion of your Bitcoin that you probably will never sell that's just gonna like go
yeah,
to your kids, And so if you are getting diligent or have recently been more diligent about tracking all of that stuff, then you could just sell the most recent Bitcoin that you bought. And then you actually know what the cost basis is. And then when it passes down, I don't know what the tax rules are, so don't
Yeah,
take this as gospel, but like,
yeah,
then, your cost basis gets stepped up for them, and then they know exactly what it's at, right? So,
yep,
so maybe that's the solution. You just have to like, die, and then
yeah,
it takes care of itself, and just pass down your Bitcoin.
yep. Yeah, I think that's pretty much how I would probably think about it. And then I guess like borrowing against it, like you mentioned, like that is that is definitely interesting to me. Like the thing that has always terrified me about that is like liquidation risk of, okay, if I put Bitcoin as collateral at X location, Unchained or whoever else, uh, you know, I'm pretty, people say like Bitcoin's volatility is decreasing over time, which is historically true. But I still think that like another March 2020 crash could very easily happen. And if there's even a 1% probability of that happening, I don't want to borrow against my Bitcoin, be a forced seller at $30,000 Bitcoin, and then all of a sudden Bitcoin rips back up to 100,000, and I just sold a good chunk of Bitcoin at 30,000 because I had to. So it
Yeah.
terrifies me, but maybe in the future, if there are other ways to do that, um, that's interesting. Obviously, like that's why treasury companies have been pretty interesting to me. You get the amplified Bitcoin exposure with no short term liquidation risk if it's structured through the preferred equity type model. So yeah, that's kind of how I think about that.
Yeah, I've written a little bit about borrowing against your Bitcoin kind of earlier on in the newsletter. And first of all, I always think like tap out all of your fiat uh, financing options before you encumber your Bitcoin, so that you don't have to worry about the margin risk. Like there's so many different ways that you can get, equity from your home or whatever it is, at probably better rates, and that it's not callable relative
Yeah,
to your Bitcoin stack. And then, you just have to make sure that you're doing this with eyes wide open, that you've got some flexibility in how you manage that collateral, that you're only doing it with a small portion of your stack. And I think, when you borrow against your Bitcoin, you are at the very least foregoing sats that you could have stacked to the extent that you're paying like an origination fee and an interest rate. Um, Another way to look at it is like you are selling your Bitcoin, you're selling it forward,
hmm,
and you don't get to necessarily choose the price that you're selling it at, or the timeline that you're selling it at, but you are selling it, and you're also not necessarily choosing how much you're selling, right? Because
yeah,
the loan is denominated in dollars, but you are selling it. Like you're entering into this like forward sales contract, and you just have to make sure that you understand the ramifications of doing that and approach it conservatively. So I think of it as like a great tool for a lot of people, maybe not a great tool for some though.
yeah. I agree with that.
Yeah. Okay. You're getting married soon, like pretty soon. How does your fiance think about Bitcoin? How have guys have you been talking about, I assume, like joint finances? What does this look like for you 5 years into your marriage versus what it looks like now? Like, how does she feel about all of this stuff?
Yeah, we've talked about it. She's she's always been supportive. I met her in 2021, uh, when I was working at EY, and then I told her after pretty shortly after we started dating, I was like, hey, I quit my job to go work for a Bitcoin company. She was like, okay, interesting.
Yeah.
And then the price went straight down after that. But I've always like over the years, like if it's
Talk about like an early baptism by fire for the relationship, right?
yeah, exactly. But I would say like the counter with that is like, I love talking about Bitcoin, obviously. I can talk about it on Twitter and YouTube and podcasts for endless amounts of time. But I typically like with her, I try not to talk about it because, she's supportive for sure, but like, she doesn't at the end of the day, she just doesn't really like care, is not nearly as passionate about Bitcoin as I am. Same with like, friends, close friends that like I really like want their perspective and like want them to like want their argument that I like, I think that they're open minded enough to like take me seriously. but they're also going to, provide good, intelligent arguments back. Because I always try to, steel man my own argument. Like, am I wrong with my Bitcoin thesis? And so far I haven't found a good reason to be wrong, but I always keep an open mind that I could be. And so I try not to talk. Basically, long story short, like, beyond a few close people in my life, like, I try not to talk about it that much. And I think that's how I've approached it with her. I'll bring it up when I can, but at the end of the day, we'll do other things, and there are other priorities in life
Is she
beyond just
is she
Bitcoin.
a Bitcoiner too though? Like does she understand the thesis and buy into it? Or is this more like, okay, I'm just gonna trust Joe with the majority of our finances in this thing that I don't understand, and I'm okay with that because I trust Joe.
I would say it's a little bit of both. She
Uh,
has somewhat recently acquired her own stack of Bitcoin, which
all
is
right.
cool. And I didn't tell her to do that. She was like, "Joe, I bought Bitcoin today." I was like, "Oh, nice, good job."
Really?
Yeah, so that was a positive sign.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, that happened. I think, like, she generally does buy into the thesis, but also she's also like probably a fairly conservative investor. Like, her cash position is a lot higher than mine, like, percentage wise. And so, like, and so that's part of the reason why, like, I'm becoming more conservative, and I'm probably bringing her to become more more aggressive, in the sense of, like, risk and volatility, or volatility, I guess. So yeah, she's supportive. She holds Bitcoin. Is she like a Bitcoiner by any means? Depending on your definition of that, I don't know if I would call her a Bitcoiner, but she's
I
a,
mean, by default, right? She's marrying a Bitcoiner, so it's like
yeah,
she bought some Bitcoin. She's a Bitcoiner.
yeah,
The question is like, okay, yeah, how convicted is she in the long term prospects, and is she reading Rothbard yet? And that's probably not the case.
yeah. No, she's definitely not doing that. But yeah, she's supportive. And I think, like, she's also, like, supportive of, like, holding it with a very long time horizon, which is also good. Um, And so yeah, that's kind of, it's been interesting, but she's been good, as far as, the Bitcoin journey, and progressing towards getting married.
Yeah, I have a pretty large stock portfolio that I've had for a very long time that if I was not married at the time that I like became fully orange pilled, as they say, would have been liquidated like immediately to buy Bitcoin.
Yeah,
And you get this counterbalance with a relationship with your spouse that is very healthy, obviously. And, life is about trade offs and priorities, and people come to things in different understandings. But, I've been surprised over the years how my wife has kind of come to me and been like, should we do this big move that would allow us to buy a larger chunk of Bitcoin to add to our stack? And I'm like, yes, let's do that. That sounds great. So you'd be surprised over time, like how the relationship develops in deeper way the longer you're married, the more you're actually dealing with these different like financial issues and questions that come up over time. You start to have kids, it's a whole other like series of questions and concerns that you've got to kind of think through and all of that. So I don't know if that's like in your all's plan or whatever, but it will, eventually, like the relationship matures, the financial position matures, and then you start thinking about things in a different way. And those influences are very good, and they help you to balance out some of the like just crazy bullishness that you feel with Bitcoin, which is all good. And as you said, like I can deal with this kind of volatility, but not a lot of people can. And at a certain point, it's like if you're starting your Bitcoin journey and you're very young, you can like go balls to the wall and stack as much as you can before you get married. Now all of a sudden it's like not as big of a deal for you to not be able to stack as much going forward because you've got this counterbalance in
yep,
your like immediate family, because you've already taken care of that, right? Like you did that early on. So it's a nice way to think about that. If you could start over, right?
yeah,
Stack really hard when you're in your 20s, and then you meet your wife or husband or whatever, and you've already taken care of the hard part of the stacking, and it makes having that conversation or that negotiation around personal finance within the family dynamic a little bit easier to swallow there.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think that that's honestly part of how I approached it. Like over the years, as I got closer to getting engaged and getting married, I thought I need to buy more Bitcoin because I know at a certain point, like I'm gonna have to tone it down a little bit, just to make sure everyone's okay and doesn't freak out when everything falls 50% in 12 months and we're like, wait, what just happened here?
Yeah. Do you see yourself continuing to work in Bitcoin? Like, what are you thinking in terms of your career? What is she thinking in terms of her career? Like, what's the longer term thought process that you have for your personal finance journey, your career journey? Like, how are you thinking about that?
Yeah, I think for my career journey, I've loved working in Bitcoin. I think like all of the Bitcoin companies that I've worked with, have been I would argue have been good for Bitcoin. It's like you said, like each progression in your career, you make more money, you get a better title, better position, and I think that's happened to me, thankfully. And I want to keep doing that. Like, I'm incredibly excited about the future of Strive. Uh, you know, I think what Strive is doing is amazing for Bitcoin and obviously for Strive shareholders. Uh, and so like I want to keep and I like the currently in the realm of like the Bitcoin and finance and like I like that combination. Obviously like True North, like Jeff Walton, that has ever I guess he started that True North back in like maybe like 2024 or 2023 ish time period, and this whole like niche of like Bitcoin plus corporate finance like has really kind of caught on and become incredibly a lot of people are very fascinated by it. This idea of amplified Bitcoin and digital credit. So I'm super interested in that. And so yeah, I think I want to work in the Bitcoin space as long as I possibly can, as long as it makes sense. And then her job, she has like she actually does have like a, a finance type job. She's not necessarily a huge fan of the job. So over time, maybe she'll find something else to do, or if we have kids, maybe she'll do something part time. But I think that's the plan. Keep working in Bitcoin, help her, keep having something to do, some a good job, and then as we have kids at some point in the future, maybe then that becomes like some sort of part time role that she can work on.
Do you all talk about financial independence in the way that I kind of write about it in the newsletter and have some target in mind for what you want to hit? Like, do you have financial conversations on a regular basis, either over the dinner table or like schedule? Some people have like scheduled meetings, like once a month, we're going to sit down and look at our numbers. You know what I mean? But how do you approach that?
I think we have had a lot of conversations recently because of trying
The
to
wedding.
yeah, the wedding, trying to get a house at some point in the
Hmm.
future. So like that's kind of been our main conversation of like, okay, if we do, put a down payment on a house, like what should be our, monthly payment, assuming that, you still have a job, assuming that I still have a job, assuming that one of us loses our job, assuming that
Yeah.
both of us lose our job, like what's the situation going to be at that point? Uh, just thinking about that, like, to really be conservative and how we approach things, but then also being aggressive enough to where we can keep accumulating Bitcoin and keep accumulating assets and watching the overall portfolio grow to where we do have like some sort of freedom. As far as like a set number, we'd never have discussed that per se, and I don't even necessarily have my own personal set number. Maybe I should do that at some point just to think about like at what point theoretically would I be like financially free. Um, but I haven't done that partially because like I enjoy working in the Bitcoin space.
Yeah.
If I if I had if I had $100 million worth of Bitcoin, which I obviously do not, uh, I honestly might still be doing exactly what I'm doing right now, which is pretty cool. Um, and so yeah, I haven't wanted to escape, I guess, as bad as I may have wanted to when I like first started working.
Yeah, it's such
Um,
a good point. I've had the same thought. It's like, okay, well, I'm basically there now, and I've been working a lot longer than you have, a little bit older than you, but it's like, what else am I going to do with my time? Like, there's only so much golf that you can play. You and I are both golfers, and we love doing that. And I would love to play a whole lot more golf. And when
mhm,
I feel like I'm going to start toning down on the work side, I will definitely do that. But it's like, I feel like I'm always going to have some type of project, some type of business, some type of job, or whatever it is to keep my mind active, to keep me working. It's this idea of like retiring, like changing the treads on the car that you're driving for your life, and just pointing in a different direction. But that doesn't mean that you're not going to continue to move forward and build things, and do something that's positive in the world, and set a good example for your kids.
yeah,
It's like, okay, great. You reach a number, you're going to just stop working. You're just going to sit around all day. Well, what does that show your children in terms of like how they should be thinking about their day-to-day lives? I think there's something like incredibly important about leading by example, on just making sure that you're always being productive and always being somebody who's like contributing to the world around you, and help, and then as part of that process, helping them understand how they can approach their career and the passion. Career is such a weird word. It's kind of a loaded word, right? And I feel like it's almost antiquated. I'm just having this thought right now,
yeah,
so bear with me, right? But it's like career in the way that it's typically concepted in people's minds is like, go to school, graduate, get a job. You've got this like career path where you're kind of narrowly defining the day-to-day work that you're doing. And yeah, there's a progression there. And then you end that career, and you retire or whatever. It's like the world around us makes careers obsolete in a lot of ways. And that's how I've come to think about my approach to the the role that I have with my family and with my jobs and businesses, or whatever it is, like the contributions that I'm making, the productivity that I'm contributing. Is There's no career. It's like, go do things that you are passionate about, that you're good at. Think of your like personal life as you are the CEO and the CFO and the CTO and whatever. It's like you've got your own personal little family business here, and there's a whole lot of different ways that you can bring in income and build your balance sheet and do all of that stuff. And if you start thinking like that, the world opens up to you in terms of the possibilities. It's like, yeah, you could be at Strive for the next few years, and then it's like, okay, there's a new opportunity to do something over here, and there's no reason that you shouldn't be able to pivot there. I think having the Bitcoin balance that you've got, like the assets that you've been able to accumulate, obviously gives you more of that optionality and allows you to take some of those chances, or forego an income, if you deem that worthy of doing, right?
yeah. I completely agree. I think I'll always like want to be building things, or want to at least be productive. Like working on myself, working on a company, or working on a business. I think that that's probably something I feel like I will always wanted to do, because I agree. Like if you just become a permanent net consumer, and like that's all that you do, you never produce even anything. I mean, I don't know. It just seems like that might be fun for like a couple weeks, and then after a couple weeks, you're like, "This is it." Like I thought this was going to be better, and maybe it's just like, okay, well, like I think there's always going to be like struggle, and there's always meant to be struggle, and you're supposed to like do hard things as much as you can tolerate. And I think that's how you grow. I think that's how you become like a better person. So yeah, I tend
Well,
to
it's like
agree.
physical fitness, right? Like you
Yeah,
don't go to the gym and then reach the physical like goal that you had for yourself, or the strength goal that you had for yourself, and be like, okay, I got there, I'm good. And then
yeah,
you go sit on the couch. No, you've got to like continue to work those muscles, in order to maintain that. You don't want your mental acuity and the life force that you have to atrophy because you're just not using it
yep,
anymore. And you've got such a great mind for analysis of various things and the reports that you put together and the content that you put out, like at the very least you've got that path like kind of nailed down, and you could always rely on just doing that if you wanted to, I think.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I enjoy doing that. I like I said, like initially, something that appealed to me about investing and saving in Bitcoin was because it's like a positive sum game that you can play. And so, writing reports, doing analysis, doing strategy for Strive, like thinking about like how to generate value and generate alpha. Like that's always been interesting to me because it's potentially a positive sum game, and yeah, I just enjoy it.
Yeah, and with the tools available, like there's never a better time than right now to be able to like leverage the time that you've got and be able to spread it across different areas that you're actually interested in contributing to. So I'm definitely exploring a lot of that. All right. Why don't we wrap it up here soon? This has been an awesome conversation. What would you kind of tell yourself looking back to do differently or better, knowing what you know now?
Hmm. I mean, an obvious example is stack more Bitcoin,
Mm-hmm.
depending on how far you go back, which is, at this point, Bitcoin's down a little bit, but it's still pretty much near close to all-time highs in the grand scheme of things. So yeah, I mean,
Except for that, like if you're thinking back to like your friends, like if you were giving advice to your friends, is there something that you would see them doing that is like a mistake with their money, or like what's kind of like the framework that you would tell them to just put their thought process in?
like my friends today,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I think they should, I would say the same thing. Like they should be stacking more Bitcoin. A lot of my friends definitely do have Bitcoin at this point.
Yeah. Yeah,
My closest
I've
friends.
found that my friend Orbit they've got a little bit now just because they're around me and it's like they know that I'm the Bitcoin guy. And
Yeah.
whenever it's in the news, they ask me, hey, what about that Bitcoin thing?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, for me at least, like I haven't had uh, any Bitcoin buys that I've made that are like decent size. I've never really regretted it. Like maybe like a couple, like I did it and then Bitcoin like just rips lower, and I was like, yeah, I may have regretted it for like a couple months, but then
It
in
stings right at
hindsight,
first.
yeah, and like now I'm like, oh, I should have bought a lot more. Why did I
Yeah.
not do that? So like at first it can feel painful, but in the long term, as long as the Bitcoin thesis continues to play out, I should have taken more pain in the short term.
Yeah. Yeah. The irony of stacking large amounts of Bitcoin is that you wouldn't do it in the bear market. Most people wouldn't because it's emotionally extremely difficult to do.
Yeah,
But in the bull market, like when everybody's euphoric, you're euphoric also, and you're feeling like super confident. Oh yeah, Bitcoin's going to $1 million. I might as well like throw this $100,000 that I just got as from whatever windfall. Uh, I'm buying Bitcoin right now, and it's like that's much easier to do when that euphoria is high,
yeah,
and and maybe you would get a better entry if you wait for that bear market. Like maybe you'd get a better cost basis on that 100,000. But most likely the scenario is that the price goes against, the price goes down and you're like, oh, well, I should wait a little bit more. It's going to go down a little bit more. And
yep.
you end up with less sats than you otherwise would if you just smash it right then.
Yeah, totally. I definitely agree. I mean, I think I look back at anyone that's tried to time the market on Bitcoin. I don't know a single person that has been able to really do it successfully that I'm aware of. And typically, it's exactly like people. The thing is the fear and greed index. Like that's a popular metric in Bitcoin and even markets in general. And I think that's how markets work. If at the top is when everyone is incredibly greedy and there's absolutely no fear at all, and that's how the price got there. And then the bottom is when everyone's freaking out and there's fear everywhere. Well, that's how the price got to where to the bottom. So it's incredibly hard to be against the grain, especially in Bitcoin, because the volatility is unlike anything we've ever seen before.
Yeah. And the danger is in the opportunity cost of waiting for that fear index to be, that needle to be buried on the fear side. And yet the price is still higher than when it was in the greed the last time you were looking at it. Right? So cool. Well, tell people where they can find you, and we'll wrap it up.
Yeah. Thanks, Trey, for having me on. This is an awesome conversation. Look forward to watching the future episodes of this as well. You can find me on Twitter and YouTube. You can type Joe Burnett on Twitter or Joe Burnett Bitcoin on YouTube, and I should pull up. But thanks for having me on. This is fun.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Thanks for coming on for the inaugural FireBTC podcast. We're going to have a lot more conversations like this with other Bitcoiners who probably have a much different experience and perspective than you. So looking forward to doing that.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you, Trey.